Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. I was already walking down Nevsky Lane, turning toward the road. A thin layer of snow streaked the sidewalk. Couples were walking past, warmly intertwined hands warmly warming each other. Grown men were hurrying home from work to their beloved wives and children. I was walking alone in the distance. Through a light haze of fog, I could see a trolleybus pulling away, grasping the bag on my shoulder so as not to lose it in the movement. I quickened my step. The doors were already closing, but one of the passengers asked the driver to wait. Entering the trolleybus, I shook my head from the flakes of snow and, thanking people for waiting, sat down on a vacant seat. Passing by a bridal salon, I smiled involuntarily. Recent memories of Charles came to mind. Soon I would marry the man half the town was in love with, whose face and name graced billboards and the most popular magazines. To the man who chose me over the 1,000 models surrounding him. Charles Vance is one of the richest men in our city, a businessman and sponsor of many orphanages, a man with a capital letter. We met 10 years ago, when I was still working as a teacher in an orphanage. He came there with his colleagues to present the orphans with numerous gifts. At first, he didn't even notice me, but I liked him almost immediately. A stately, tall, decent, handsome man, helping those in need. And if it hadn't been for his kind heart, perhaps we would never have met. I was jolted out of my thoughts by a sudden jolt. The trolleybus slowed, and several passengers moved forward. The bags of the woman sitting in front of me rolled toward the beginning of the transportation, knocking the unfamiliar man to the ground. Holding had not been taught. "Mother, do you want me to smash my head in here?" Grow pants from the wet snow that flew in. The exasperated man turned to the old woman. The same ran her eyes, but answered nothing. Standing up from her seat, the woman slipped, whether she was dragging 10 bags, and then could not hold on. On the face of the stranger appeared obvious dissatisfaction. He angrily kicked the lying bag, from which it tore, and the contents fell out directly onto the dirty floor. Seeing the confused woman, I jumped up sharply from my seat and approached the perpetrators of the noise. Respect for elders, you know what it is. My voice sounded confident, reflexive. I covered the old woman with my body. "Speak as you should." The surprised woman, whose gray strands peeked out from under a dark kerchief, threw down her eyebrows and looked out from behind me. The man was taken aback, but he was still aggressive. "Why are you meddling in other people's conversations?" His hard gaze went straight to my eyes, but I didn't back down. "I'm talking as I see fit. Let him watch his rags. I wish your children would talk to you the same way." I shouted, picking up the belongings of the poor woman who was the target of this ill-mannered tramp. The stranger shouted and headed for the exit. The other passengers watched the scene intently, not even trying to get into the fray. "Are you all right?" I gently stroked the woman's back and put her bags on the empty seat next to her. The old woman, as if still reeling from the situation, slowly sat down and looked at me with grateful eyes. "I'm fine, daughter. Thank you so much. You didn't have to fight with that fool for me." She motherly took my hand in her rusty but soft palms and smiled. "What's your name?" "I'm Kathy." I smiled back at the stranger and sat down across from her. "Is someone going to meet you?" "No, I'm fine." In truth, she nodded politely in acknowledgement of my worries. "My name is Camille. Let me write you the address. Come and have tea with me." "I'd be glad to, Camille." The old woman's eyes sparkled, as if one of her wishes had come true. That's when I turned to the window and saw the familiar houses. "Excuse me, this is my stop." I handed the crumpled woman a sheet of paper and a pen from my bag, so she could write her address for the next appointment. The woman happily wrote the street and house on the mirror in her jagged, barely legible handwriting, and gave me a glance. Stepping out of the trolleybus, I breathed in the fresh, frosty air, freeing myself from thoughts of that unpleasant insolence. Suddenly, there was an insistent sound. I reached deep into my bag, searching for the source of the ringing. Pulling out my phone, Charles popped up on the screen. Smiling happily, I picked it up. "Good evening." It was on the other end. "Hi," I answered, continuing toward the house. It had stopped snowing. The wind had died down, but the squeak from under my shoes gave away that I was outside. "You're still not home." Charles's voice became sharply agitated. "I would have picked you up from work if I'd known you'd be home so late. Don't worry about it. There was a lot to do today. I got off a little late, but I'm almost home now." As I stumbled, I cried out sharply, afraid I would fall. "Kathy, are you okay?" Charles on the other end of the phone was almost shouting, probably scared for me. "Charles, I'm not a child. I just tripped. I'm fine," I assured the man in a calm, slightly cheerful voice. "Let's meet tomorrow at lunch." My lover tiredly exhaled directly into the tube and spoke "Scare me well." "I'll pick you up at 1 o'clock. I'll be waiting for the meeting. Kisses to you too." I smiled, dropping the call even though I knew my man couldn't see me. He always told me about my beautiful smile. And when I see him or hear his voice, I'm immediately thrown into color, even though he's busy, working and famous. Charles tries to give me all his free time. Of course, except for time with his family. He is the only child of his parents, who are already quite grown up, and often spends evenings with them. My lover has long offered to visit his family together, but I am still afraid that I did not like my future mother-in-law. I didn't consider myself a confident or well-mannered, or worse, some arrogant lady, but the fear of my future husband's mother still did not leave me. As it is customary since ancient times in most Russian families, mothers-in-law have a peculiar attitude to the wives of their sons, especially if they are the only heirs. Twirling the ring on the ring finger of my right hand, I took a nervous breath. Panic was building along with the feeling of familiarity approaching. After tidying up before bed, I lay down on the freshly made bed and pulled out my laptop. My thoughts were filled with nothing but Charles. I thought about how much I missed him, how much he missed me, how soon we could live together, how I would cook him dinner, how I would meet him after work, how he would hold me gently in his sleep and whisper about how much he was in love with me. Thinking back to how skeptical my family and friends had been about my relationship with one of the richest men in our city, I chuckled. They hadn't believed from the beginning that such a powerful, handsome, self-sufficient, and confident man could pay attention to someone like me. And what was my older sister's surprise, who had spent her whole life talking about how I wasn't good enough for the perfect husband. When she met Charles and me at a familiar restaurant in our neighborhood, Lisa had married when she was barely 20. She considered it a major accomplishment in her life and bragged about it left and right, saying things like, "I'll never achieve that." My mother and father were always supportive of the eldest daughter, continuing to trample on my own dignity, humiliating me with words, actions, and attitude. But I loved them despite their behavior towards me, respected them, helped them, and never turned my back on my family, no matter what. The ringing of the phone made me get out of bed and clear my thoughts of the echoes of the past. "It's ringing," I answered quietly. The rustling in the receiver alerted me. "Yes, I can come to you." A woman's barely audible and voice echoed on the other line. I nervously recognized the familiar voice. It was Lisa. "Lisa, are you okay? Why are you calling so late?" I asked worriedly. "Can I come over?" My sister asked again, trying to suppress the hoarseness in her voice. Probably out of tears, I only said yes and waited impatiently for Lisa to arrive so I could finally find out what had caused such a late call and visit. Putting on my house robe, I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and sat waiting for my big sister to arrive. I would never leave her or my parents in a time of need, no matter what our relationship was. Lisa hadn't called me in over a year, citing business, family, raising a son, and generally I'm the youngest and should call on my own. But now, at 12 o'clock in the morning, her voice spoke of something else. It begged for help, even though it didn't say so directly. Insistent. And I was already at the front door, taking the iron door away. And looking at my sister with a frightened look, I gasped, "What's wrong with you?" Before me, I saw not that cheerful, smiling and cheerful blonde girl I remembered, but depressed and clearly not caused. All frightened girl who covered her bare shoulders with only pain in such a bitter cold. "Kathy, I'm sorry. I have nowhere else to go." Her sister's voice was shaking herself. She was shivering, shifting from foot to foot. Lowering my eyes down, I noticed that Lisa was standing barefoot. I silently hugged my sister, and she nestled against my chest with desperation, encompassing me with her cold, skinny arms. Without a word, I led Lisa into the kitchen, sitting her down at the table. I went to get my things, choosing the most appropriate clothes. There were 1,000 thoughts brewing in my head, but one of them was the one that most resembled the truth. Her husband, a cruel tyrant, had kicked her out of the house without even a chance to dress. And I was seething with anger that some jerk could treat my sister like that, even though they have a child together. "And I'll pour you some hot tea." I handed my sister warm socks and a cozy sweater, and I headed for the supervisor's office. My hands were shaking, whether from worry for a loved one or for injustice to my sister. Lisa tapped her nails nervously on the table, looking away from me and toward the door. "Drink." I handed my sister a mug of hot chamomile tea, hoping it would calm her down a little. I tried to catch her gaze, but it was in vain. She was looking anywhere but into my eyes. "Explain to me what happened." "I apologize to you, Kathy." Lisa sobbed and then broke into sobs, occasionally gasping from her own hysterics, and put my arm around her shoulders, gently stroking her back. Words wouldn't have helped here, so I tried to soothe my sister only with actions. After a while, we moved into the room. Lisa was curled up on the bed, staring at the door without taking her eyes off it. "Can you tell me?" "I won't tell my parents anything, Lisa." My voice was quiet, but my sister heard me. "He kicked me out. He cheated on me and kicked me out." My eyes were still fixed on one point. Only my voice sounded hoarse and detached. "John said he was going to take my son away from me." My eyes widened, and I was visibly nervous. Even though I rarely saw my nephew, I loved him, and I wasn't ready for him to be in the hands of this fool in love, even if his parents moved away. "He needs to stay with his mother." Even though Lisa was not a very good friend and older sister, she treated motherhood with awe and love. And Liam loved his mom too much. When Lisa married, John seemed to everyone to be a fairly adequate, fun, and loving man. But his behavior at that moment kept me on my toes. I tried to warn my sister, but my word against my dad and mom and my sister's crush meant absolutely nothing. Perhaps situations like this had happened before, but I was not privy to them, just like my parents, because the Smith family was always set as an example to me that one should be just like Lisa, find a man like John, and live happily ever after in the communal living quarters of her husband's late mother. Now that Lisa is completely devastated and exhausted, bereft of the will to live, lying in my home not knowing what to do with her tyrant husband, my fears from 10 years ago have been confirmed. He is not worthy to be my sister's husband. And despite the fact that Liam loves his father, he is not worthy to be the one. I can talk to a lawyer I know. Will you be divorced? Will Liam stay with you? I whispered, hoping to rouse my sister. She only looked up at me, waving her head in denial. I love him. We just need to make up, Lisa whispered, covering herself with a blanket. Stunned, I jumped out of bed and spread my arms. You're crazy, Lisa. That man has no respect for you. If he cheats, he doesn't love you. He's blackmailing you with his son. You have the right to go outside in 30-degree cold, without shoes or clothes. And you're still talking about love. My eyes blurred and my thoughts were filled with hatred for my son-in-law. I wanted to protect my sister and do everything I could so that this rude man would no longer be able to hurt the one I loved. Lisa didn't say anything, only occasional sobs, sluggishly hiding her face under the bed. Liam and her parents asked me rudely. Receiving a nod in response, I exhaled quietly, knowing that my nephew was okay, one of the main tasks at the moment. After waiting for my sister to fall asleep, I headed to the kitchen, made myself a strong tea, and sat down with myself. What to do? What to do? Should I tell the family? Should I call the lawyer in secret from my sister? Or maybe have a conversation with John so that he realizes his mistake? My thoughts were jumbled with questions in them, and after sitting at my desk for over an hour, I didn't notice how I fell into a dream right behind him. I woke up to my neck stiff and my arms aching from resting against the hard surface of the dining table all night. Sighing heavily, I got situated and headed to the bathroom to shower and wash off the remnants of last night's horrible night of biting myself into terry towels. I quietly entered the room and stared in amazement at the removed bed, which no longer had my sister on it. Only a torn sheet from my work notebook caught my eye. Thank you for taking me in at this hour and at such a difficult time. I'll take care of my problems. Don't worry yourself. With gratitude, Lisa. As in childhood unbearable, I muttered to myself under my breath as soon as I read the note. I didn't expect anything more from my sister, knowing the dislike she had for me. I smiled warmly as I ran my fingers over the uneven letters on the sheet. She'd left me notes like that when I was a teenager. Usually she asked me to cover for her in front of her parents while she ran off to discos and boyfriends. And at the end, there was always a threat to make sure I didn't screw her over in front of her father and mother. Lisa didn't know how to thank for help, no matter what it was. She might have wanted to, but she couldn't because of her pride, her temper. She didn't like to show weakness. I missed my family, but I wasn't sure if they did. That's why I visited Mom and Dad so rarely, and my sister even less often. Glancing at my watch, I ate, realizing that I was already late for work. In a hurry, I grabbed my bag and keys from the nightstand and left the apartment, leaving my gloomy thoughts behind. After greeting my colleagues, I went to my office to do the paperwork for the children whose parents would soon be coming to pick them up. For a year, I have been the head of the orphanage, where I started working as a teacher. When I opened the first file, I laughed. It was said that Vaughn would never be taken too naughty, and now I found a mother for Zirianov. Having attached the photo to the sheet, I continued my work. There was a knock at the office, and he came in. John. I was surprised to see my son-in-law on the doorstep. Where's Sliska? He didn't even deign to say hello. Dark-haired man began to ask questions to me. Why do I know whose wife is mine? Deciding not to specify where exactly his wife spent that night, I answered with a question I know that she called you at night. John stepped up to my desk and fixed his angry gaze directly on me. The door behind him swung open, and Charles walked in. The situation had reached a fever pitch, and it was urgent to save the day. But how? I had no idea. Charles, it's okay. I gave the man I loved a calm look so he wouldn't worry about me. Where's Lisa? John asked again, already pounding his fist on the keyboard on the table. She flew off to the side, taking the pile of papers with her. I squirmed, afraid of getting caught in the hot hand of my angry son-in-law, but I pulled myself together and answered firmly. I do not know where your wife. Look elsewhere. Charles quietly approached John from behind, put his heavy palm on his shoulder, squeezing weakly. I beg you not to frighten my beloved with your rash actions. The vein on Charles's forehead stirred, and his hand clutched my son-in-law's jacket more and more tightly. Look for your wife not in Butova. It has come to this. Otherwise, I'll have to intervene. The ardor, you see, immediately cooled down. He raised his head to look at Charles. He was at least 30 centimeters taller than him. Nervously, with a gulp, he turned to me. If she shows up, tell her I regret what I did. Finishing his speech, John gave me another glance. Charles, with a displeased look, and left my office. I exhaled heavily, falling into my desk chair. My thoughts were immediately filled with Lisa. If John had come to my place, then my sister's parents didn't have her either. Where could she have gone? Panic came over me imperceptibly, but a gentle hand tracing patterns across the back of my palm gave me a drop of calm. Who was it? What had happened? My favorite. Charles kissed my temple and kept his warm, moist lips on my skin for a while to reassure me and let me breathe easy. He knew better than anyone how to bring me to my senses. It's all about support. I need to know that someone is there to support me, whether I'm right or wrong. I just need someone who will lend a shoulder in times of need and not leave me halfway. In the difficult times of my life. Remember Lisa, the one we met at the restaurant? My fiancé nodded approvingly. That's her husband. She showed up at my door last night barefoot, naked, a year after we last met. He kicked her out, promised to take the baby, and this morning there was no sign of her. I thought she'd gone home or gone to her parents' house. But now I'm confused as to where my sister might be, plunged into the most negative outcomes of events lying at the bottom of my heart. The panic was building again. In my chest, she could be anywhere. She has no friends, no more relatives. Anything could have happened to her. And the worst part was that she could bring the trouble on herself. Kathy, don't worry. I'll call my contacts and we'll find her as soon as possible. Charles touched my arm and turned me toward him. I buried my nose in his broad chest and cried quietly. Throughout our relationship, I'd never shown my feelings about my family in front of him. I was always afraid of judgment on his part. Why am I so careless of the people who raised me? And why am I so reluctant to talk about my older sister? So the topic of my family was rarely broached. And if we did talk about her, I told her that everyone close to me was doing well, feeling great. I wasn't lying to her, because Charles was the closest thing to me. After a few minutes, I pulled myself together, and after seeing the man I loved that I was fine, I headed to the principal's office to ask for time off. I frantically dialed my mom's number to ask when the last time she had seen Lisa, and to see if she knew what was going on between her favorite daughter and son-in-law. "Mom, hi," I whispered, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. "Kathy, terrific. Nuja." In a voice I immediately realized John brought her nervously out of my eyes, back into my head. I tried to put together the right sentence, so as not to scare my mom even more and not to set my sister up. After all, I had made a promise not to tell my parents about what happened yesterday. "Mom, is Lisa home?" I asked. "Daughter, we can't find her." She turned off her phone. John panicked. "Liam, so Mom wants to see her." Mom tried to hold on, not to cry, but I could feel her motherly heart howling with pain and incomprehension. Where is her daughter now? For a second, I wondered, what about me? Mom had never baked like this, but there was no time for that sentimentality now. So I immediately put all that nonsense out of my head. "Don't worry, Charles will get some people on it and we'll find her," I reassured my mom. The silence in the phone alarmed me. I added, "John came to see me too. I'm very worried too. Thanks for your help, Kathy." Really, Mom's voice had leveled off and she seemed to be squeezing the phrase out of her. Thanking, as Mom used to say, an ungrateful daughter. Apparently, it's not very easy. I just remained silent and dropped the call. Charles, meanwhile, was waiting for me in my office, at the same time calling his friends and the police. I told him what clothes Lisa had left with and where she might be. "We'll find her." Charles said affirmatively and offered to drive me home to my parents' house. I didn't feel like driving, and I couldn't really help them at the moment. I decided to think at home about where Lisa could go to escape her husband's tyranny and threw off my heavy winter coat. I went straight to the kitchen. My stomach grumbled, demanding at least some food, because I hadn't eaten or drunk anything since last night except tea, which I'd fallen asleep with. Cut myself a salad. I proceeded to eat, at the same time contemplating my sister's act. She'd run away from life, from cheating, from her parents. But she would never run away from her own child, leaving it in the care of John. The act was justified only because her husband's tyranny had driven her to a nervous breakdown. Yesterday, she had acted distant, as if pondering what could save her from all that was happening. A memory flashed through her mind. "Daddy, I love him, don't I?" shouted Lisa, hiding behind my skinny back, standing right between the two lights of the disco with the bandit. Some people call it love. My father took a swing at my sister, so we both reflexively pressed against each other. "You're not even 18 yet, and you're already here and loving me," you say. Lisa, embittered, glared at Dad, turned around and left the apartment, slamming the door. I, grabbing my jacket off the rack, rushed after her. The pouring rain prevented me from seeing her silhouette in the darkness. I stumbled but kept running, hoping to stop my sister. I couldn't let her walk around alone at night in this cold, rainy weather. Lisa shrieked as I entered an abandoned, dilapidated building not far from our house. Echoes echoed throughout the room. Already soggy yellow leaves lay on the floor. The bricks impeded forward movement, and the hum of the birds scared the hell out of me. Walking a little farther, I noticed a shadow sitting on the windowsill, resting its nose in my lap. Lisa shouted again to get her older sister's attention. "It's cold here. Let's go home." The girl raised her head silently, and I came closer and threw the jacket I had taken over her shoulders. We sat in the dark, and only the light of a street lamp in the next street gave us some illumination. The silence was soothing, thoughts felt. The fresh, cold air gave us a chance to breathe. My sister quietly rested her head on my shoulder and sobbed. "Don't tell anyone about this place." I, fleeing here from the pain, whispered to Lisa and continued to stare into the darkness. I immediately jumped up from the table and started rushing around the kitchen. Is she really there in the winter? I asked myself. My sister hid there from pain, from family, from judgment. And most likely, she remembered this place at such a difficult moment for her. Grabbing my phone, I immediately called Charles and asked him to take me to the place, making him promise not to tell anyone about it. Even after 13 years, I wished I could keep that little big sister secret. We drove at breakneck speed, outrunning the cars ahead of us. Charles pressed the gas to the floor, recognizing that we might find my Lisa. "You asked confidently." Charles took my hand and gave me a warm look. I nodded and squeezed his fingers in my palm. As I drove up to the ruined building, my heart sank. I was afraid to see the worst possible outcome there. Afraid that my sister might have done something irreversible. "I'll do it myself," I told Charles, stopping him just before the entrance. Walking down the familiar path, I froze, hoping for the best. Turning in the right direction, I exhaled with ease. Lisa was sitting on the very windowsill by the cats in the plate she had apparently taken from my house. I walked quietly over to her so as not to startle her with my presence. Sat down next to her and gave her a sisterly hug around the shoulders. She knew I was coming. She felt it, so she wasn't the least bit afraid. "For so many years I humiliated you, always telling you that you wouldn't be happy because of your soft nature. Mocked you." Her tear-red eyes rose guiltily at me. "But only you came for me. Me, your sister Lisa." The veil slowly made my pupils. "I will always be there for you, even when you can't see it." She clutched her frost-dried hands into my coat and cried quietly. It wasn't as hysterical as yesterday, but it too was full of pain and fear. I ran my hand through her blonde hair, pulling her close to me. Pearls of tears dripped from my eyes, coating the plate with wet spots. My sister didn't push away, only harder. The two strong-spirited women outside, showing their hatred for each other, sat and cried together, helping to heal, to shake the drops off their cheeks. I turned to my sister. "Come, I'll take you to my place. You get back to normal, and we'll go through with the divorce and pick up Liam. Thanks for your help. I've really missed you all these years," thankfully giving me a smile. Lisa rose from the cold surface. We headed to the car, where an excited Charles was obediently waiting for me. Seeing me and my sister, who was in a not-so-good state, he nodded understandingly and silently opened the door for my sister. We drove in silence, listening to the radio at minimum volume, so as not to disturb the already sleeping Lisa in the back seat. I turned occasionally and looked at my sister warmly. No matter how much we fight or what we say to each other, we are sisters, and our bond is unbreakable, even through a dozen years from driving us and going home. Rest. "Did you do a lot to help me find her too?" I whispered, so as not to wake Lisa. "You're welcome," She's part of my future family, after all. Charles smiled and kissed the back of my palm. I blushed angrily and gave him a look full of love and gratitude for everything he'd done for me. We walked into the house with Lisa, and she immediately went to rest. She wanted to go see her son, but I assured her that he was fine. After texting my mom that Lisa was fine and she was with me, I decided to rest too. I ran a bath, prepared a glass of white wine that was left over from my birthday party. I turned on a movie and started to enjoy the atmosphere. I was finally able to fully relax and feel light for the last 2 days. The water was dyed a soft pink color from the bath bomb I had used. The lather enveloped my feet, and I enjoyed watching the action of the movie. Again, that annoying ringing of the phone broke the idyll I was in. Christina popped up on the screen as the director called. Immediately, bad thoughts arise in my head. Wiping my hands on a towel, I answered the call. "Kathy, we have an emergency." The excited voice of the headmistress scared me terribly. "What's happened?" "Vahan is in the hospital, in intensive care. His psychologist-to-be mother is here, away on family business. There's a whole mess going on." The tone was getting louder. In the background could be heard a woman's terrified scream and voices trying to calm her down. "I'll be there soon," I replied and ran to pack in a hurry. I had to wait longer than usual for a cab. My head was wet. The wind was blowing in my ears. I froze to the bone while I waited for the car in the driveway. I raced to the orphanage. Without even taking off my outerwear, I ran to Christina's office. "Tell me, what hospital is he in?" "He's my son," shouted Emily, grabbing our principal by the blouse. Even looked as scared as possible. "Emily, get a hold of yourself. We're going to sort this out now," I interjected into the furious woman's monologue. She was crying and screaming at the same time. She shifted her already tired, heavy look at me and sank down on a chair. "We will go to the hospital together with you now, but on one condition." The woman listened to me attentively, and as soon as I told her about a possible meeting with him, she literally lit up. "I'll talk to the doctor. But you must understand the adoption papers are not ready yet, and you are not yet his full parent. The closest people are usually allowed in an IQ, so I'll do what I can," I concluded. "Encourage Emily." She nodded. I asked her to wait for me outside the office for just a few minutes. After learning all the details of Safin's case, we went to the hospital together with the expectant mother. The woman sitting behind the wheel of her car looked confused. Her eyes were staring into the void. Her hands were shaking and her heart was clearly bleeding. Vahan was not her blood child, though, and she had wanted to take him away long past the age of an infant. Emily loved this venturesome, cheerful little boy with all her soul, and Ilyusha, always hearing her voice, ran from the farthest room into the hall to chat with his mother for a minute. With each meeting, they grew warmer and warmer toward each other. The love grew, and so did the affection. So it was very hard to look at a depressed Emily, who had just found happiness and was afraid of losing it again. He would be fine. I supported the woman. Elisi died when he was 8, just like Ilyusha. Emily suddenly spoke. "If the same thing happens to me that happened 7 years ago, I will not forgive myself. You didn't mention this moment when you applied for adoption," I answered, looking into the woman's face. "Mentally, I'm completely healthy, and I don't see any similarities between him and my late son. I just want to feel like a mother again and give this beautiful boy a better future." She slowed down, giving such details. "I'm afraid my heart can't take another loss this serious. Kathy, I want to love and be loved." I nodded understandingly and stroked the woman's shoulder. She waved the tears from her cheeks and fixed her quail strands that were getting in the way on the road. When we reached the hospital, we went straight to the medic who had left in the ambulance with Safina. "Sophia, how is he?" I asked, addressing a young girl sitting near the entrance to the intensive care unit. The doctor said he would only talk to higher-ups. He didn't tell me anything. Sophia lowered her head guiltily, occasionally sobbing. Leaving Emily with the nurse, I found the doctor and he led me to his office. "The boy has had a serious poisoning. He's fine now, but if he suddenly worsens, I'll have to go to the police," the doctor concluded. "Where in your facility could a child find alcohol?" "What? What are you talking about?" My eyes widened in surprise. He had over half a liter of hard liquor in his system. The child drank it in one gulp. What caused the poisoning? "For his age, it's almost a lethal dose," the doctor replied, looking at me unhappily. "And I heard you. We will deal with this situation. The boy is not easy, always found adventure. What could possibly go into his head?" I answered confidently, hiding my shaking hands under the table. "His foster mom can see him. His adoption papers are being processed. I can't present them right now. But if he meets with his mom, he'll obviously feel better. He shouldn't be nervous or moving for more than 3 minutes. He's conscious, but he's in serious condition. For his age, a nurse will see you out." "Tell me, did Filatov authorize it?" Disgruntled doctor threw and again ducked into a pile of papers on his desk, and I thanked him and hurried to rejoice Emily. Soon the woman was escorted to the boy, and I stayed behind to wait for her. Remembering the wonderful 15 minutes of quiet time I'd had in the bathroom brought a warmth to me. I too was worried about Alyosha, and the woman's life situation touched me too. But I wondered if anyone was wondering what was going on inside me and worrying about something joyful for me. Emily came out of the room and came straight to me. "Kathy, thank you so much for your help. If it wasn't for you, I would be torturing myself with scary and frightening thoughts. But I am now 100% sure that my baby will live." Without a moment's hesitation, the woman took me into her arms. I reciprocated and wished her son a speedy recovery. Sophia, having finally learned about the baby's condition, went home, and Emily decided to drive her. "I hope I get credit for this," she chuckled to herself. I headed outside, putting my hand in my pocket. I frowned, fumbling for a piece of paper. Unfolding the piece of paper, I smiled. It was the address of the very nice grandma from the trolley bus. Looking at my watch, I decided to visit her and thus free my thoughts from the negativity that had accumulated over the past few days. I knocked meekly on the door, waiting for my landlady. The door was opened by a stately man, probably a little older than Camille. He looked at me perplexed and later asked, "Who don't believe in God? We're not buying vacuum cleaners." "Excuse me, I'm here to see Camille." An old lady looked out of the man and immediately broke into a smile. "She owed me a mug of tea. Kathy, you made it," exclaimed the woman from the food man aside, thereby throwing him out of his stupor. She gave me a motherly hug and motioned for me to come in. "This is Kathy. Remember I told you I rode in the trolley? She was the one who protected me," Camille said proudly, helping me take off my coat. Grandpa hesitated at first, but later he smiled too and extended his hand to introduce me. "I'm Kevin." The nice man led me into the kitchen and put the kettle on. Camille, on the other hand, started to take out cookies, nuts, and jam. I felt at ease and chatted happily with Kevin while his wife set the table. "So you're an educator too?" The man spoke excitedly as soon as he learned that I had studied at a teacher training university. "My Camille is also a teacher. She used to teach Russian. Really, it was my favorite subject in school," I exclaimed, eating the pie Camille had given me. We chatted nonstop, discussing every possible topic. The old woman was pouring and already on his third mug, and our conversations did not end. "Do you already have children?" the woman asked, looking at me without any shyness. I waved my head negatively. "We have only a son, and that too from an orphanage, but ours." There was an awkward silence in the air. I decided to lighten the mood. "Mom didn't give birth like that, but brought him up like that." I took the woman's hand and stroked the back of it with my other hand. She smiled. We didn't bring up the subject of children again, but there was still a little tension. Seeing through the window that it was already dark outside, I decided I should head home. Lisa had probably come to her senses by now, and Charles was ripping off my phone because I had set it to silent in mode. "Thank you, Kevin and Camille. You helped me out. I feel better after sitting with you guys. I hugged those nice people and headed for the bus stop. After dialing Charles' number, I waited for an answer. I've called you 15 times, Kathy 15. Charles' voice was rather gruff, but excited at the same time. I put the phone on silent. A kid was hospitalized at work. I replied guiltily. I'm sorry. Charles stammered a cough and answered I didn't realize that something serious had happened. I was really worried. I understand. I think about you a lot. A ridiculous silence formed after these words. I miss you. I love you too. His velvet voice made me smile. I love you and hope to see you soon. I love you, I replied and reluctantly hung up the phone. As I got on the trolleybus, I fell asleep instantly, forgetting all my problems. When I woke up 2 stops before my stop, I put on my hood and waited for the transportation to slow down. The house smelled like childhood. Taking off my coat, I walked into the kitchen and found my sister in there, diligently chopping vegetables while dancing to the music on the speaker. You're back. Where have you been? Did you leave the bathtub with water? Lisa asked. A smile was visible on her face. The beauty had gone from her eyes, and she looked quite awake. It smells. Here are the horns, I said, walking to the table. I had things to do. Didn't get into it at work. I see you're feeling better. I made up with my favorite sister. Soon, getting rid of the tyrant husband. What could be better, my dear? Laughing, Lisa replied, putting the ingredients for the salad into a bowl. Thought I'd treat myself to your favorite food. Saw cottage cheese in the fridge, so I made some rusks. Are you happy? I nodded without further ado and pulled my arms around the girl. For a tight hug, she came over, and we were reunited. Just like when we were kids, to old songs and the smell of cotton candy wafting through the apartment. We lost track of time, chatted nonstop, remembering the past and telling the present. In my sister's eyes burned the very fire that John had once extinguished in them. I left the Waddles, drinking my tea, and listened intently to my sister. She was excitedly telling me how her son was growing up, how he resembled me as a child, how she missed me in the difficult moments of her life, despite her attitude toward me in the past. I was glad that this particular person had come back into my life somewhere in the back of my mind. My inner child cried tears of joy that at 28 years old, he had found a big sister. Lisa looked back at my facial features with admiration, occasionally touching my hair. She saw herself in me. And though we weren't alike in personality, we were insanely similar in appearance. Dark as coal, hair as thick as coal, beautiful eyebrows and brown eyes like the core of a planet that you wanted to drown in. We achieved each other's love, which we were very happy about. Now at 2 o'clock in the kitchen, drinking tea together, I woke up to movement next to me. Lisa turning in different directions, almost pushing me out of bed. I lost my eyes and stared at the clock 7:30 in the morning. There was literally half an hour left to sleep, but I decided not to tease my body and grudgingly swore by the bathtub. Even at this early hour, nothing could spoil my mood. I took a shower, did the necessary facials, and decided to curl my thick black hair. After half an hour of torture, I had a charming style on my head. I could wear it to a wedding. I heard behind me. A sleepy Lisa was smiling in the doorway, looking at me. Oh, come on. I laughed, applying balm to my lips. I have to be irresistible at a wedding. I always do. My sister gently ran her hand over my back and went to take a shower. After packing, I went to work while sending a good morning message to my favorite man. Yesterday, I felt ashamed for forgetting about him and making him worry in hopes that today would pass without incident. I was thinking about having a romantic dinner with Charles this evening. Walking into work, I received tons of compliments on my hair filled with color. I headed to my office. There was the most unexpected surprise waiting for me that I never imagined. Noah, what are you doing here? I asked in surprise, staying close to the door. It's good to see you too, Kathy. The man smiled wryly and walked over to me. I'm not. Why did you come here? Shaking hands betrayed my indignation at that. I took a step back. My first, but also my hardest love, the one I'd spent years trying to forget, was sitting in my office, sprawled on a chair in a masterly manner. It's been 7 years since we last met, and on that fateful day I hoped I'd never see his smug face again. But fate thought otherwise. Don't be afraid. I came not to Kathy, who was head over heels in love with me, but to the head of Kathy's orphanage. His grin never left his lips even now. For as long as I could remember, he'd always been such a narcissistic, arrogant kid. But I guess he'd gotten a hold of me in my 20s, and our breakup was torture for me. What you need? I took off my coat and snapped at him. You haven't changed a bit. You're still beautiful, slender, bold. Noah gave me an animalistic look and smiled. Noticing my glare, he continued, my wife has a soft spot for kids without families. I'd like to sponsor your institution. 3rd floor, 2nd door on the left. You want to see the director? Through my teeth I sneered, trying to distract myself, and looked at the personal files on my desk. And they said that sponsors are handled by you, especially Vance. Hearing the last name of my favorite person out of his mouth, my fists clenched involuntarily. I jumped up from my seat and pointed my finger at the door. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. My thoughts are all jumbled up. I don't know what I'm saying. Bracker hesitated, throwing me into a stupor. I've never seen him so lost. A moment ago, his sneers and chuckles filled the office, but now his confidence was gone. My wife is dying. The man blurted out. He touched every object on my desk to keep his hands busy. What are you talking about? Sitting back down, I asked. You're supposed to know what true love is, right? He asked sharply, raising his guilty eyes to me. I nodded. I met her 3 years ago. She's young, confident, and her eyes are like an ocean you want to drown in. He spoke of his wife with admiration, as if she were something impossible, beyond the reach of ordinary people. 2 months ago, we found out she had cancer. Terminal brain cancer. His gray eyes filled with tears. Nerves made him drop the magnet he'd grabbed from my pencil case. She had dreamed of children, but now she asked me to give all her savings to orphanages. So I did. Now she wants me to sponsor at least one orphanage in her memory. I covered my eyes, trying not to feel the pain. What is Noah feeling right now? I didn't know what it was like to know that your love could leave you at any second. But now, looking at someone whose eyes are already tired of crying, whose hands are already down, I can see how hard it is. I want her name to hang on your wall of honor for the rest of her days, to be immortalized here. It embedded itself in my heart as well. An innocent tear fell from my eyes as I listened to Noah's story about his wife. I forgot about the pain this man had caused me. I pulled myself together and was willing to help him with the paperwork for the long-term sponsorship to make this all go faster. I will do my best to get it all set up. Go to the director and submit the paperwork as soon as possible. And leave me a picture and your wife's information. All funds coming from you will be recorded in her name, I concluded. I hope for the best. Noah, thank you so much for your help, Kathy. He looked at me so warmly and tenderly that I wanted to support him. I walked over to my former lover and hugged him. Hang in there, I said and looked at the man. At that moment, I realized that life could turn 360 degrees in a split second, with no way to turn back. Noah looked as if he were dead. When he talked about his beloved, even men like him can love so much that they would do anything for someone whose heart beats only for him. I immediately texted Charles about how much I loved him and was afraid of losing him. People need to know that they are loved. They need to feel it because there is no telling what will happen tomorrow. Charles immediately called me to ask what had happened. I briefly explained the situation, and he invited me to dinner that evening. Inspired by tonight's date, I continued to work. By the end of the day, I was mentally looking forward to meeting my lover. I wanted to finally embrace him, breathe in his wonderful scent, and talk to him. There was a knock at the door. Charles came in with a huge bouquet of chrysanthemums, which I love so much. "Oh my God, they're beautiful," I exclaimed, accepting the gift. "Not as pretty as you, but still." Charles smiled and kissed my cheek. I flushed and, laying the flowers on the table, threw myself into the arms of the man I loved. His scent of pine and wood drove me crazy whenever I was near him. "I missed you so much," my fiancé said quietly, pulling me close to him. "Let's go, we're late." And I, smiling with all my 32 teeth, threw on my coat and hurried happily after Charles. Once at the restaurant where Charles had reserved a table for us, I relaxed, ordering a bottle of wine and a variety of entrees. We proceeded to dinner, talking about everything in the world. He was a suave, gentle, confident man. I felt safe with him. When we are together in an informal setting, I always feel sleepy, which means I have the right person with me. Charles is the one who will follow me wherever I go, support me whenever I go, and help me wherever I go. Our love grows stronger every day, even when we don't see each other. I feel it subconsciously. Charles raised his blue eyes to me, and I froze. "I proposed to you so long ago. Maybe it's time to get serious," Charles asked. Why did I hesitate? "What are you talking about?" I asked back. "Tomorrow's a day off. I'm going to my parents. Maybe you can visit them with me." Charles looked in my eyes for agreement, but all he saw was wine. "I'm sorry, I'd love to." "Really?" I was silent. He was still waiting for me to continue. "I want to deal with my sister and brother-in-law, do the paperwork, and wait for Vaughn to be discharged. I feel responsible for all of this. I want to go to your family with a pure heart. But that's obviously not right now." Charles nodded understandingly, but at the same time resentfully, and continued eating his steak. After a couple minutes of silence, he did speak. "You always think of others first. When are you going to start thinking about yourself?" I was running out of time, appearing as a piece of beef. When I heard those words, I knew that Charles was right now more than anyone else. But I couldn't abandon my sister to her fate. I promised to help her with her divorce and her son. The story of Vaughn and his mother is also a sad one. And my happiness is probably not as important as their grief. It's the same situation with Bracker. I was afraid to lift my head and look into my fiancé's face, because he's waiting for me to be ready to meet his family so he can start preparing for the wedding. And I, with my overly kind heart, am doing anything but my personal life. I'm sorry, Charles, but that's who I am. I take responsibility for what I do. After finishing my glass of wine, I grabbed my purse and left the room without saying goodbye. The frost was getting colder, and I wanted to wait for the trolley. But I decided it would be more comfortable and faster to take a cab. Charles took his time getting out to stop me. He knew I needed to cool down and be alone with my thoughts. When I turned around, I saw a familiar figure standing at the entrance to the restaurant I'd just left. "Mom," I shouted, hoping my eyesight was failing me. My mom, dressed in a gorgeous burgundy dress and brown mink coat, was chatting sweetly with a man unknown to me. She turned around startled at my voice, and as soon as she saw me, she grabbed her conversation partner under the arm and walked into the establishment. I waved my head, referring to my inebriated mind, and I thought I had imagined it. The cab stopped, and I deftly jumped into the car. "I give you my address." When I got home, I didn't find my sister. A puzzle was forming in my head. I frantically dialed my sister's number and paced around the apartment, waiting for her to answer. "Lisa, hi. Where are you?" I asked. "My mom called, asking me to come over. She had to leave on business." "Don't worry, I'm fine," my sister replied. In the background, I heard my father's laughter and Liam's children's voices. "Is Mom okay?" Abruptly, I spoke up. Sister only said they were fine and invited me to visit, which I declined. Again, a pile of questions. Why was Mom at that restaurant? Did Dad know what she was doing there? And who was that mysterious man next to her? My temples were burning. The feeling of my brain melting wouldn't leave me. I was nervous. I couldn't find my place. I didn't even know what it was that was making me question myself so much. Cheating is my biggest fear. But cheating on your mother with your father is worse than if it happened to me. I couldn't take it any further, so I called my mom. "Mom, good evening." My voice sounded pretty rough. "Hello, daughter." My mom's gentle voice alarmed me. The last time she had called me daughter was over 15 years ago, not counting the latest situation involving Lisa's disappearance. "Where are you now? Can we meet?" I decided to ask the question right up front. "I can come to your place after the big meeting." My mom threw me the text address and immediately disconnected. I looked at the faded screen and waved my head. "No way," I said to myself. She hadn't been to my house once since I'd moved away from them. I hurriedly texted the address to my mom and waited for her almost at the front door. Charles hadn't called, but I was worried about him, even though it wasn't a good time. So much had happened in the last few days that my head was bursting with trying to find answers to all the questions in it. More than an hour and a half passed, and still I sat in the kitchen waiting for my mother. The doorbell rang, and I ran to open the burgundy dress, and brown fur coat in my heart unpleasantly shook, and I became even more nervous than before. "Come in," I said dryly and moved toward the kitchen. Mom took off her outer garments without a trace of shame, and I noticed how deep her cleavage was. "At such an advanced age, I know what you want to talk to me about." Mom sat down across from me, not even bothering to hug her daughter. "No matter how I feel about my father, he's still my father." "How can you do that?" I raised my tone sharply without breaking eye contact with my mother. "You should have listened first," risked my mother's stern voice. I slowly lowered myself into the chair and raised my eyebrows questioningly. "Your father has huge debts with nothing to pay," Mom concluded, watching my reaction. This meeting at the restaurant could cover them once and for all. I rounded my eyes and didn't even know what to say to that. I didn't want to know what exactly Mom was up to, but I wanted to get this masquerade over with as soon as possible. "The amount of the debt," I blurted out, not waiting for the story to continue. Mom looked at me in surprise. $1,500. The woman cut me off, as if to tell me, "How can you help me? I'll give you this money, and you finish your meetings with strange men." My nerves were fraying, my palms were sweating, and I wanted to get rid of company like my mother. She didn't comment on my words in any way, but I could see on her face that she was dumbfounded as much as I was. I walked to the bedroom and pulled an envelope called "Wedding" from the nightstand. I had been saving money for it, knowing Charles was rich, but I wanted to contribute to our shared event. Holding out exactly $1,500 to my mother, I spoke. "Tell your father the relatives helped or sold some gold. Don't say I gave it." Mom's eyes glistened, and she lowered her head. Something inside her ached. Seeing a mother crying, even a mother like that, is very hard. I wanted to hug her, kiss her, and tell her that I still loved her. But my pride was greater than my weakness in front of my loved ones, especially when they care so much about you and your family. "Thank you for your help, daughter," my mom whispered and looked guiltily into my eyes. She left my abode. I slowly slid down the wall to the floor and cried. I couldn't stop mine. The tears came. There was a lump in my throat. My head was bursting with migraines. She left without just saying thank you, without asking how I was, without asking what was wrong with me, without telling me how much she missed me, how much she loved the one she used to walk around like that as a child. Or Layla. I was ready to scream from that one, but I was also aching inside from the reanimated wounds inside that my own mother had inflicted on me. I had emptied myself completely over the last week of my life. My mind began to leave me, my body, and I lost consciousness. Waking up from the sunlight, I didn't realize where I was at first. Then, coming to my senses, I looked around. My head was still splitting open. Drinking a painkiller, I cleaned myself up and decided to distract myself from bad thoughts with work. There was no desire to communicate with anyone, and after just checking Messenger for messages, I pulled out my laptop to check the archive of old Fosters. Christina had instructed me to look for a child named Charles, and I set about checking the personnel files that we had only recently converted to electronic form. My eyes were blind, but I kept searching lest I fall asleep and think of those who were not thinking of me at all. Nervously flipping through my files, I caught a glimpse of a familiar birth date, 17080. I smiled, remembering Charles. I took a picture of the boy's file. I moved on again, but something told me to go back. The boy with the same birth date as my future spouse was also named Charles. There was no information about his family. The only thing listed was future guardians Vance and Vance P.W. My eyes rounded. I couldn't believe what I was seeing right now. Charles had never talked about the fact that he was an orphan, but the odds of him not knowing about it were very high. Could it have been a mere coincidence? Yes, but my gut told me it wasn't. I didn't know what I would do if I withheld such information from my loved one. It would be a lie, which I hate so much. But on the other hand, only parents should be told about such things. My principles won out, and I quickly called Charles, asking him to come to me right away. He didn't even ask any questions, said he was on his way, and hung up. I hastily prepared a light lunch to feed Charles, and then I frantically waited for him. The last few hours of waiting have been torture for me. Another bout of severe headaches knocked me out. There was a knock at the door, and later Charles came in, asking why the door was unlocked. Apparently, in my condition yesterday, I had forgotten to lock it after my mom came in. Charles, I'm sorry for leaving last night. I wasn't myself. I had so much on my mind, I said, but Charles held me close, kissing me gently on the top of my head. I'm ready to love you any way you want, impulsive, angry, funny, sad, kind, responsible, working. Charles whispered quietly, I will hold our love for both of us. When will it be hard for you? I guiltily raised my eyes to the man and asked him to sit down. He obeyed and sat down on the bed. You look worried. Did something happen again? My lover asked, looking around the room, which was in chaos. I slowly turned the laptop screen toward him and asked him to read the data, warning him not to take it personally right away. What did Charles ask after reading the personnel file of one Charles? Who is this? And why my parents' records? Charles, I could be wrong, but the date of birth and the family of the guardians, I blurted out, feeling the tension in the air in one breath. It could be someone else, but I couldn't keep a find like that from you. I sat next to him and wrapped my skinny arms around his broad back. He kissed the back of my palms, without taking his eyes off the monitor. Through several layers of clothing, I felt his body throbbing with heat, his skin covered in a thin layer of goosebumps. I wanted to take all the excitement and worry away, so he wouldn't feel what he was feeling at the moment. In an instant, he pulled out his phone, took a picture of his personal file, and jumped up abruptly from the bed. I'll come see you as soon as I meet my family. I love you. Charles gritted his teeth and walked out of the apartment, slamming the door. I panicked and subconsciously blamed myself for my lover's condition. There was no telling how this situation would turn out. Living for over 30 years, considering people as your parents, and then suddenly finding out that you were taken from an orphanage. Once again, one of the hardest days of my life has come. What else did fate have in store for me? My hands itched to call Charles and tell him it was a mistake, that it couldn't be. But he was already rushing to his family to find out the truth. The unknown is the most frightening of all. So I sat on pins and needles until 2 o'clock, waiting for news from Vance. The door opened and Charles walked in. Every lost person in the world. My cheeks burned with frost. Looking down, I noticed the wound on his arm was bleeding as well. What happened? I ran up to my lover and grabbed his wrist sharply. The blood was dripping and the wound looked bleak. Charles didn't say anything, just sat on the bed and breathed heavily. I fetched the first aid kit and began to treat the cut. It was pointless to ask Vance anything right now. He was as if in a trance, trying to understand himself, to answer the worrying questions in his head. I was close by and morally tried to give support to the one who always helped me in difficult moments. At one point, Charles turned to me and whispered softly, "Is it true?" I couldn't find the right words to answer, so I just hugged him tightly so that he could feel how much I cared about him. He nuzzled his nose into my neck, sobbing occasionally. At that age, it's hard to realize what your family has kept from you for years. Maybe if it wasn't for me, it would never have come out, and it made me feel guilty. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Charles looked at me in surprise, saying, "What does this have to do with you?" But I was the one who found the file and told you. "It's not your fault, Kathy." Would they ever tell, or would I ever find out for myself? Lies always come to light, concluded my future husband, and waved a sail in the lease on his cheek. He'd always been strong, never showing emotion. But now he is in front of me so defenseless, needing a hug and someone to listen and give advice. Are they your family? Anyway, I said, hoping that he would forgive his parents and move on with his life. It will be hard for me at first, but I have forgiven them. They raised me, brought me up to be a good person, and never gave me a reason to doubt their love. My lover's eyes lit up. Apparently, pleasant childhood memories of my mother and father surfaced in his mind. We sat like that, discussing his childhood until very late in the evening. Once again, one of the most difficult days of my life. Again, a storm of emotions, both negative and positive. We fell asleep with Charles right in our clothes, next to each other, holding each other tightly against each other. 2 weeks later, I was showing off in front of the mirror, trying on different dresses that Emily had prepared. She was a good designer, and as a thank you for helping me with it at the hospital, she offered a choice of dresses I could borrow from her. "Mom, it's dark blue. It fits perfectly." I turned 360 degrees so everyone could see what this gorgeous dress looked like. I'm wearing it. Mom looked at me warmly and nodded in approval. Once a lawyer, I knew helped Lisa divorce John and Sue Liam. Relations in our family improved. Mom started calling me for evening tea parties. We grew closer, and our hatred between us slowly faded. I've probably forgiven her for treating me that way. I grew up, realized my mistakes, and my mother realized hers. We became one big friendly family, and it was time to introduce my family to Charles, the closest person to me. We were preparing for his arrival. I was hesitant, and Lisa and Mom were setting the festive table. Dad was wiping down his sports awards from his youth to show them off to his future son-in-law. He looked at me guiltily, sometimes as if he wanted to say something, but didn't dare. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked him as I walked into the living room. He turned away abruptly and rubbed the goblet harder, ignoring me. I turned to him again. "Daddy, daughter," Daddy said quietly, coming toward me. "Forgive me for everything, and thank you for the money." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. I had hoped Mom would hide the fact that she had given me the money for the debt. "I'm in favor of Meshkov." I only nodded. Dad smiled and kissed me gently on the cheek. "Be happy," said the gray-haired man, and went on with his business. A slight anxiety was building up inside. Excitement made my stomach churn, and my palms sweated with nerves. Charles should have arrived by now, so everyone was ready for him. Lisa wasn't worried, since she had already seen him and called him occasionally. Dad had the easiest time, since he's the head of the family. The doorbell rang throughout the house, causing the whole family to line up at the entrance. Charles, dressed in a chic dark blue suit, a tee with a black overcoat thrown on top, walked in with 3 large bouquets of red roses and a small bag. My mom eyed, and my sister's eyes sparkled. I just smiled gently and kissed the man on the cheek, helped him take off his coat, and gave everyone his snow-white smile. He handed a bouquet of flowers to each woman and shook my father's hand. I was beyond happy as my dad chatted sweetly with Charles, finding a common topic of discussion. Liam was running around the room playing with a new toy given to him by his future uncle. The day I found my family and was finally able to introduce them to the man I loved. Charles admired Mom's pie, and complimented his sister's salads. Occasionally, he would cast me a look of tenderness and love and laugh at Liam falling. I wondered what kind of father my future husband would be. He would be the most caring, sensitive, responsible parent. And I don't regret one bit that I accepted Charles' proposal. I will remember this cozy, warm family dinner for the rest of my life. After saying goodbye to the family, Charles and I left the apartment and headed for the car. "You have a beautiful family," Vance said with a smile. I'm glad this evening went well. Leaving a wet kiss on Charles' cheek, we moved forward. After discussing the event, Charles drove me home and went to his family to let them know that he would be bringing his fiancée to meet them next week. The subject of the orphanage was simplified and safely forgotten, which I was glad about. No longer did this mystery hold the heart of my father and mother, and Charles felt at ease. Once in my apartment, I finally lay down. My legs had been buzzing since the morning. I ran errands, grocery shopping for dinner, shopping for dresses, and helping Mom and Lisa with the cooking. Staring up at the ceiling, I wondered about the future. What would happen next? After meeting his parents, I would have to start preparing for the wedding. Knowing the status of my fiancé, a wedding can't be simple and inconspicuous. Charles said he wanted to show the world whose heart he could win, which made me very uncomfortable. Rather, I should be proud that my husband will be Charles Vance himself, a man whose name is on the lips of every second and in the thoughts of every third. But soon he will be my husband, the father of our children, and the head of our family. I want to have 3 children, a boy and 2 beautiful girls, so that they will take the best qualities from both of us. To be as beautiful as Charles and as kind as me. My smile stretched on its own as I thought of my future family. Before I knew it, over an hour had passed. I had showered and lay in a clean, fresh bed, happily closing my eyes in anticipation of tomorrow. The alarm clock, which had been ringing nonstop for over 5 minutes, made me get out of bed. Finding myself in the bathroom near the mirror, I was horrified. My face was covered in pigmented spots that I didn't know where they had come from. As a child, I had only been allergic to lilies. But knowing this, I never bought anything even scented with these flowers, so as not to be covered with strange spots. In a panic, I went to the kitchen to take my medicine, and on the table I found a huge bouquet of white lilies. A note lay nearby. The question that arose in my mind was who and how could have gotten into my apartment while I was asleep. Opening the note, the puzzle in my head came together. I thank you for what you did for me and my wife. Sincerely, Noah Bracker. That asshole still has the keys to my apartment. There's no other explanation for those flowers. He didn't even know I was allergic, so he brought this particular bouquet. I smiled inwardly. I was glad that his wife was pleased with her husband's act and that I had once again done a good deed gratuitously. But I still called Noah and asked him to get rid of the key to my apartment and thanked him for such a wonderful surprise. After a drink of anti-allergen and pills, I put the gift away on the windowsill and started to get ready for work. The spots from my face were slowly going away, but not completely. From having flowers in my apartment, going outside, I felt a nice breeze and breathed in a full lungful of fresh, cold air. Going to work, I greeted my colleagues and decided to spend half an hour with the kids. Each of them dreamed of a family, a mother's caress, and a father's guidance. They were still small, but because they were here in the orphanage, they understand many hardships of life from early childhood. They know what it is like to be left alone without support, without a mother who can protect, without a home where it is always cozy and warm. When I first got a job here, being very young, having just graduated from university, I cried almost every working day, suffering from pain for these little angels. I wanted to hug each one. I wanted to take them all home and raise them as my own children. But unfortunately, it was impossible. Here, either you are lucky and you get into a good family, or you grow up here until adulthood. And then you are released into free flight, and you are left all alone in this hard adult world. The sweet girl came up to me and looked at me with her light blue eyes. They were uncannily similar to Charles' eyes, which made me run my hand gently through her hair. She was barely 4, but her demeanor was much older. She only cried when she was really hurting physically, never got cranky, dressed herself, and tried to always help other children when needed. "Kathy, you look like my mom," Eve pronounced. Taking a seat next to me on the bench, I hesitated and wondered, because she came to us as a baby and can't remember her parents. "Do you remember her?" I asked. "No, but I feel that you look alike," the girl answered and smiled radiantly. I smiled back and thought about it. Going to my office, I was still thinking about the words of this clever little girl. Once I got to work, those thoughts left me, and I began to study the documents. Christina visited my office a couple of times during the day, informing me that there was an event for sponsors coming up, and I needed to contact them and arrange a meeting for the next few weeks. After calling everyone who sponsored our orphanage, the last person I called was Charles. "Beloved," I said as soon as my future spouse picked up the phone. "Hello," answered the man on the other end of the line. "How are you?" "I'm fine. I wanted to let you know that there is an event coming up, and you need to come over next Thursday to discuss the upcoming party," I cheerfully informed him. "Okay, I'll be there. Don't forget that we are going to my parents' house this Saturday." Charles' voice was as gentle as ever. I said I remembered everything. We said goodbye and I dropped the call. That Saturday, Lisa helped curl my hair while telling me how much Liam liked the girl from daycare. After her divorce from John, it was as if my sister had been reborn. Her eyes glistened with happiness. She felt alive. She found a job to her liking. She dressed much better than before. And she often came to my house to gossip and eat her special dry goods. I was happy to see her sister blossom. After all, if she's happy, and so am I. Lisa picked out a beautiful light-colored dress for me to match my beige-heeled shoes. I was almost ready and was waiting for Charles to pick me up. As soon as I thought of him, he called, "Kathy, I'm sorry. There was a force majeure at work. I won't be able to pick you up in time. Take a cab. I texted you the address. I'll meet you at the house," Vance assured me and hung up immediately. I thought something serious had happened, so I didn't get mad at my lover, telling my sister that I'd have to drive myself. She became agitated. I assured her that I would be fine and saw her off safely. Once I was home alone, I began to panic because meeting his parents had been planned for so long, and I was only doing it now. Thoughts of my mother-in-law not liking me filled my head. Especially after the incident with Charles' papers from the orphanage, her attitude toward me had worsened. That's what I thought. Putting on my coat and shawl, I was about to go out to catch a cab. But looking at the time, I realized that I would get there much earlier than Charles. So I decided to take the trolleybus to pass the time and think about my future meeting. I grabbed a bouquet of paper-wrapped flowers and left the apartment. Outside, it was slowly starting to warm up with the arrival of spring, but the snow was still lying, and the evening frost burned my cheeks. When I reached the bus stop, I saw a familiar face. Camille asked me in surprise. The woman turned around and reached out to me with a hug. I hugged the old woman gently, and we started talking. We also got on the trolleybus together and chatted the whole way, occasionally glancing out the window so we wouldn't miss our stop. "I'll get off here. I need to buy a cake for tea at the bakery. See you later, daughter," said Camille, and went to the conductor to pay the fare. Just a couple of minutes later, the voice of the trolleybus worker sounded disgruntled. She was aggressively trying to explain something to an old lady I knew. Not thinking long, I approached them and stood between Camille and the conductor. "Is there a problem?" I asked, looking at the woman in uniform. "The grandmother doesn't have her pension card with her." "Does she want a cheaper fare?" the conductor blurted out. "She gives me and the woman an angry look. Can't you tell she's a pensioner?" I said to defend Camille's point of view. The conductor's eyes widened, and she was ready to get into a verbal altercation with me. But Camille took my hand and shook her head, telling me to stop. "I pay full price," holding out a $10 bill. Worker, I turned around and walked the old woman to the exit. The woman nodded gratefully and didn't say anything. I sat down in my seat and sighed heavily. The conductor didn't look away from me for the rest of the ride. Anger became a residue in my mind over the situation, and I fidgeted all the way until it was my turn to get off. I saw a familiar neighborhood as soon as I stepped onto the street. Camille and Kevin lived nearby. I walked slowly to the house Charles had texted me and waited dutifully in the driveway. After 5 minutes of waiting, Charles's big SUV was visible at the beginning of the yard. He got out of the car and kissed me gently on the cheek, apologizing for not being able to pick me up. "You're insanely beautiful," Charles concluded and opened the door for me to go in first. The walls of the house looked familiar, but I didn't let it show. When we got to the 4th floor, I stared at the bell, which had a little bear painted on it, just like Camille's. I tensed up. A memory flashed through my mind, but I tried not to think about it. It couldn't be what I was remembering now. Charles pressed the bell, and slow footsteps sounded outside the door. I was startled to see 2 happy yet surprised familiar faces. Kevin, I glanced questioningly at the man, and then shifted my gaze to the woman behind him. Camille, I immediately remembered this sweet elderly couple telling me that they had adopted a son from the orphanage. On the trolleybus today, Camille was telling me that her future daughter-in-law was coming to meet her tonight. I didn't pay any attention to that at all, even when I saw the house. I thought that Charles's parents and my elderly acquaintances lived in the same house, but I didn't even realize it was them. "Kathy, did you decide to come in for tea?" The old lady asked uncomprehendingly. Mecca with eyes from me to Charles. "Son, where is the daughter-in-law?" Charles was the most stunned of all. He couldn't understand how we could know each other and why he didn't know about it. He was silent for a split second, opening his mouth in a coughing fit. At 6, he looked at his mom. "Mom, this is my fiancée, Kathy Vysotsky. Have you two met?" inquired my future fiancé, who was still surprised. "Charles, I'll explain everything to you now," I said, standing on the threshold. Camille hesitated and later led us into the house and seated us at the table. All this time, we were in awkward silence. I'm waiting. It's a fascinating story of when and how my family managed to meet my future wife without my knowledge, Charles said, and fixed his gaze on his mother. She hesitated, but as soon as she wanted to speak, I gave her a warm look and began the story myself. I had helped this nice woman on the trolley a couple weeks ago. She invited me to tea. A week later, I met Kevin. I concluded, they are insanely kind and nice people. Charles, I'm glad I'm in such a good family. We were afraid you'd end up with some backwoods girl. How lucky we are to have Kathy. The older man exclaimed, but immediately calmed down at the serious look of his wife. It must be fate, Charles said, and gave us his snow-white smile. We all laughed together at the situation that had happened to us and started dinner. Charles' parents warmly told him about me, how nice we chatted over a couple of mugs of tea, and then began to talk about my future husband's childhood. We did not do without albums with old photos, which made Charles blush at times. We had a wonderful time. Charles' mom said in confidence that if another girl had come, she would not have been able to love her. We laughed with her and continued setting the table for tea. When it got dark outside, Charles and I decided to go home. Camille thanked me for the bouquet I had given her and kissed me on the cheek as we were leaving. I am very happy to meet you already as my future mother-in-law and father-in-law, I said, hugging Kevin. You are our daughter now. We are very happy too, concluded Camille. We said our goodbyes and left the prince's family to their elders. It was the most unexpected meeting that could have happened to me. In my heart, I was insanely happy that Charles' parents had turned out to be such iridescent, sweet, and kind people. Now I had no doubt that Charles was my destiny. 6 months later, my palms were sweating. I folded nervously, and a lump formed in my throat from my morning awakening. There were people walking around the militia, but I was completely oblivious to them. Right now, my thoughts were filled with nothing but Charles. I pictured him in a black tuxedo, standing at the altar with his hand outstretched. Lisa was running toward me with a bouquet of flowers. Mom was trying to put a veil in my hair, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed with no sign of life. "Sisters, what's the matter with you?" my sister asked, looking into my sad face. "I'm scared," I replied. "There are so many people there that I think I will faint as soon as I step outside this room." "We're right here. Your father will walk you down the aisle. Your family is with you," Lisa concluded, stroking my hands with her warm palms. I smiled lightly and hid from my mom poking me with one of her stilettos. I was insanely grateful to my family for their support. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have been able to survive the wedding jitters. Through all the hard times in our lives, we reunited and became one big, strong family again. As I put on my wedding dress and stood on my heels, I felt a burning sensation in my lower abdomen. My shaking hands, which could not hold the bouquet of the bride, gave away my excitement. Taking a deep breath, I pulled myself together and walked out into the main hallway where my father was already waiting for me. "You're beautiful," Dad said admiringly, putting up his hand for me to take hold of. "You're gorgeous too," I whispered and smiled. We walked to the main hall filled with hundreds of guests, of which mine was no more than 50. The red carpet was shot under my feet. The silhouette of my lover could be seen in the distance. I slowly stepped onto the carpet. A beautiful tune started playing, and I tried to relax. This was my day. The day I was the queen and Charles was the king. A day where our lives, souls, and destinies were woven once and for all. I caught admiring yet envious glances from girls and women. The men looked on with nobility and wonder. Perhaps the guests from Charles' side did not expect to see someone like me next to him, but it was too late to assume anything. With my head held high, I walked down the aisle with my father at my side. Charles's eyes traveled down my face from head to toe and stopped at my veiled face. His hand reached out to me, and I boldly placed my palm in his. I could feel his excitement through the touch. He was worried as much as I was. Once on the dais, from where I could see the entire auditorium, I gasped at the number of people who were all staring at us in anticipation. Charles leaned over to me and whispered, "You are amazing. I have chosen the best woman to be my wife in my life." I was embarrassed, and my cheeks blushed. Even though no one could see it, I could feel my face burning. The registrar appeared next to us. The man looked us over and nodded approvingly at Charles. The music grew quieter. Our parents sat in the front rows, and Lisa and Charles's close friend Joe stood near us. My knees were trembling under my dress. I was very nervous and afraid that I wouldn't be able to control myself and would faint right at the wedding ceremony. Charles' hands held me so tightly that I was sure he would hold me up. The registrar began his speech, and I noticed immediately that my mom and Camille were in tears, whispering among themselves. I smiled. It was nice to see my mother-in-law and mother-in-law interacting, and they really liked each other the first time they met. "Are you ready to take Kathy as your wife?" The registrar spoke and looked at Charles. "I do," Vance answered without a trace of doubt. "Are you ready to take Charles as your husband?" The registrar exclaimed again. A lump rose in my throat, and I thought for a moment that I could not speak nervously, but I answered nevertheless agreed. "Congratulations, you can exchange rings." Charles gently lifted my hand and placed the engraved ring on my ring finger. I felt a slight electric shock run through my body. I repeated the same motion with Charles' ring. By signing my name at that second, I lost my last name and became Vance Kathy. "Congratulations, you are now husband and wife. Can the groom kiss the bride?" the registrar exclaimed, and the gold spread throughout the room. My husband gently lifted the veil from my face and looked into my eyes. I was still in a state of shock and could not believe that all this was happening to me. "I love you," Charles said, and touched his moist lips to mine. The guests shouted bitter, and our moms were still crying with happiness. For a moment, The voices were silent, and it seemed to me that now my lover and I were all alone. My longtime dream had come true. I had found my own family with the man I loved. Breaking our kiss, I held my palm almost on my husband's cheek and said, "You are the best thing that happened to me in my whole life." The guests didn't stop applauding. The music got louder, and we went down to the families to receive congratulations. "Dear children, be happy. Long life to you and more babies," said Camille, and gave me a big hug. Then she kissed her son. Mom was still wiping tears from her cheeks and couldn't calm down. A happy lion was running around her and tugging at her dress. "Mom, I'm getting married." "Why are you crying with laughter?" I asked. "I am so happy for you that I can't contain my emotions." Mom pecked me on the cheek and hugged me as much as she could. I stroked her on the top of her head and also hugged my dad. Lisa at the same time danced merrily with Joe, not paying attention to the people around her. Apparently, loved ones. "Did you get a look at Demon's friend?" I asked my dad. He just laughed and looked at his eldest daughter fatherly. When we all found ourselves in the banquet hall, my mood doubled. Everyone was having fun, dancing, getting to know each other, and socializing. Charles and I could not part with each other for a second. Sitting at the newlyweds table, we held hands under the table and giggled at the guests who were ridiculously performing tasks from the contests. I occasionally watched a happy Lisa, who was getting to know people now and then and trying to find common ground with everyone. Mom was chatting sweetly with her saint, and Camille couldn't take her eyes off little Liam, who was running around the table. Everything I had dreamed of had come true and was there for me. Remembering the thoughts I wanted to share with Charles, I turned toward him. "Charles, there's something I want to tell you," I mumbled, distracting him from talking to me. "I'm listening to my favorites." Smiling through all 32 teeth, Charles replied. "I've been watching this girl at the orphanage for a long time," I began to say. "She looks just like you with her eyes." One day she came up to me and told me that she felt like I looked like her mom. Charles listened to me intently and did not interrupt. "Maybe it's a sign," I said cautiously. "Beware of your husband's violent reaction." At first Charles hesitated, even frowned, but then he smiled again and said, "With you, I am ready to take even 1,000 of these blue-eyed angels." I, not holding back my emotions, shrieked and threw myself into the arms of my beloved. Hear and repent with my nose in his neck, which smelled of pine and wood. There was no limit to the joy. We adopted Eva and would later have 2 more children. Once again, I was convinced how pure and kind a soul the man I loved so much had. As Charles and I looked at each other in love, we smiled and continued to watch. That day was the happiest day of my life. I fondly remember the moments of the family and Charles. Now in our family, there are already 3 happy children and 2 equally happy parents. And the little girl adapted quickly. As soon as we got her, and 2 years later we had twins in our family. The grandmothers are happy to spend time with their grandchildren, while Charles and I are busy with work. We go to parks in the evenings, take the kids to amusement rides on weekends, and try to go on vacation in the summer. Charles is doing everything he can to give me and our children a better future, and I am so grateful to him for that. Like I said, my husband is a wonderful father, occasionally overpromising, but that happens to all men. Fatherhood first. I was sitting at work, going through sponsorship agreements, and I came across him. Memories of earlier years popped into my head, where for weeks on end, strange situations happened that put me in a stupor at the time, although thanks to this difficult period in my life, and gained a lot of things. First of all, our love with Charles has been put to a tremendous test of strength. We didn't leave each other at crossroads, supported each other no matter what happened, and stayed true to our choices no matter what. All the historical ties after 10 years only grow stronger. After all, if it weren't for my sister's divorce, Lisa and I would not have been able to become as close as we are now. Her life has turned out very well. She married her husband 3 years after we were married, and her view of the world had changed, and her relationship with her parents had only gotten better after mutual help. And if it wasn't for her, we would still be living with my mother and father on each other. The main thing is that everyone realized his mistake and took into account his attitude to others. I have realized and understood a lot of things over the years, and now I feel that I have not made a mistake anywhere. Gratitude and support is what each of us deserves.